Good evening, Chairman Umberg and members of the committee. I'd like to begin by thanking you and Senator Rubio for the opportunity to speak on behalf of my son, Piki. I stand before you as a constituent, as a veteran of the United States Army, a former elementary school principal, but most importantly, a mother and advocate for children who suffer at the hands of an abusive parent and who become victims of our family court system. My purpose today is to share my personal testimony, to recognize the critical role that you all play as California leaders, and to provide an opportunity for you to reflect on how the vicious murder of a 5-year-old child can influence the decisions you make and how you choose to serve your constituents. 4 days ago, I awoke to a pillow that was soaked with tears. Even in my sleep, I knew that when I opened my eyes, it would be the 6th anniversary of my son's death. Piki was 5 years, 2 months, and 2 days old when he was murdered. And for years, I prayed for a child, and finally, after 5 miscarriages, God answered my prayers. In 2016, when Piki was 4, I told my ex-husband I wanted a divorce. Within 15 days, my son and I moved out of the family residence due to fear, threats, and harassment. Being told, we can do this my way, or I can go for the jugular, left me with no choice. A few days later, the family court judge awarded exclusive rights to our home to my ex-husband and ordered me to pay the mortgage while he resided there. 5 months into my divorce, my ex-husband filed false allegations with Child Protective Services and coerced my son into telling a story about abuse. In a written report to CPS, the forensic interviewer informed the social worker it was her belief that my son was being coached and there were inconsistencies with his story. The mental health consultant interviewed my son and asked my son if he was afraid of his father. My son responded, "I don't want to talk about that." All evidence submitted to the judge was ignored, and my ex-husband was allowed to maintain joint custody. Over and over, I requested restraining orders, and my requests were denied. At the end of one of the hearings, the judge stated that my ex-husband, a now convicted murderer, gave a testimony that was more credible than mine. He denied my request for a restraining order and supervised visits. During our separation, my ex-husband terrorized our son. Piki would return home with bruises on his body, refused to talk about his time with his father, and obsessed over the number of days left before he had to see his father again. In January of 2017, prior to a custody exchange, my son repeatedly asked to stay with me. As I prepared a shower to bathe him, I asked my son to take off his clothes, which he did. It took every ounce of strength I had not to cry in front of him when I saw the fading bruises on his body. I reached into the shower to check the temperature of the water, and when I turned around, my son was gone. I searched throughout the house, only to find him sitting in a fetal position behind the bed. And when I said, "Papa, come on, you need to take a shower. We're going to be late," my son replied with tears in his eyes, "Please don't make me go, Mama." In April of 2017, when I brought evidence to an evaluator, she stated she didn't have time to review what I brought and accused me of coaching my son. Again, the evidence was ignored. My request for sole custody and supervised visits were denied. And 8 days later, when my ex-husband failed to show up for a child exchange, I called the police to file a missing child report. No matter what happened, I never gave hope that my son would return to me. In May of 2017, approximately 1 month into my son's disappearance, I returned to court to request sole custody for when my Piki came home. Even though the judge acknowledged that my son disappeared while in his father's custody, he denied my request and ordered an evidentiary hearing to be set to explore custody. It turns out that on April 21st, 8 days after the custody evaluation, my ex-husband suffocated our son in the back seat of his vehicle while my son slept after spending the day at Disneyland with his father. According to homicide detectives, my son awoke during this violent act. His first attempt at suffocating my son failed, and as my son sat helplessly in his car seat, his body twitching, my ex-husband proceeded to suffocate him a second time. He then drove for 2 hours and proceeded to dump my son's body in a heavily wooded area in Santa Barbara County. And during the homicide investigation, the detectives discovered that my ex-husband began planning my son's murder shortly after the December restraining order hearing. It took the judge 3 months from the date of my son's disappearance to terminate the child support payments I was previously ordered to pay. It also took the same amount of time for the judge to temporarily suspend spousal support payments I was required to make. By this time, my son's funeral had passed, and my ex-husband was incarcerated. The decision to award my ex-husband part of my pension in 403B came at a later date. Peaky's Law is critical because it allows much-needed training to be established for judicial officers. For the record, targeted training is absolutely necessary. The judges involved in my divorce case made uninformed and reckless decisions that led to the death of my child. The first judge on my case was appointed to the bench in 2012.
Mrs. Estevez, you've gone for 6.5 minutes now. So I'm sorry we have...
Can I just finish the last one, Senator?
I'll give you one more sentence. Thank you.
At no time did my son ever ask his father to physically or emotionally abuse him, nor did my son ever say, "Daddy, please suffocate me and take me away from my mommy." Children have the right to live without fear, abuse, and violence, and it is our responsibility to ensure this right is safeguarded. Right. I thank you and ask for an aye vote.
Oh, and we, we can't express our sympathy deeply enough. It's every parent's worst nightmare, and I appreciate you taking this tragedy and turning it into something for others.